Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Jennifer stood frozen in the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. The air inside Obinna's house was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten time, but none of that mattered. Her eyes were locked on the framed photograph hanging on the wall. A man stood in it, tall, with piercing eyes and a confident smirk. Something about his face sent an icy chill through her veins. She had never met this man before, yet the sight of him filled her with a deep, unexplainable dread. Her fingers trembled as she clenched her purse tighter, willing herself to look away. "Who is that?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Obinna glanced at the photo and smiled. "That's my father," he said casually. Jennifer forced a nod, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't know why, but something told her that the past she had spent years burying was about to resurface in the most terrifying way. She spent the rest of the evening distracted, barely listening as Obinna talked about his childhood. He was warm, charming, and completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her mind. Jennifer had always been careful, always kept her walls up, and yet, against her better judgment, she had let Obinna in. It had started with an aggressive rejection when he first approached her, but his persistence had worn her down. She had convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, he was different. But now, staring at the image of his father, her chest ached with the unmistakable weight of a mistake. Something about this felt too familiar, too dangerous. When the night ended, she left in a daze, barely responding to Obinna's goodnight. As she walked home, a single thought repeated in her head. Why does that man look so much like the face my mother always tried to forget? Jennifer didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ceiling as old memories clawed their way to the surface. Her mother had raised her alone, and though she had never spoken much about Jennifer's father, the few times she did, her voice had been filled with nothing but bitterness. Jennifer had grown up hating the man who had abandoned them, swearing to never make the same mistake her mother did, trusting a man. And now, after years of avoiding love, of pushing people away, she had unknowingly walked into the life of a man whose past might be tied to hers in the most horrifying way. She grabbed her phone and texted her mother, her fingers shaking. "I need to see you tomorrow." Urgent. Then, tossing the phone aside, she curled into herself, a deep pit of unease settling in her stomach. What if Obinna's father is the same man who destroyed my mother's life? The possibility made her blood run cold. Jennifer sat across from her mother, her hands clenched into tight fists beneath the cafe table. The morning air was cool, but she felt suffocated by the weight of her own thoughts. Her mother, Evelyn, sipped her tea in silence, her eyes scanning Jennifer's face with quiet curiosity. "You said it was urgent," Evelyn finally said, setting her cup down. Jennifer took a slow, steady breath, unsure of how to begin. The image of the man in Obinna's house still burned in her mind, making her stomach twist uncomfortably. "I met someone," she started, her voice betraying none of the storm within her. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "And?" Jennifer hesitated. "I saw a picture of his father." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And I swear, I've seen that face before. He looks familiar." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a flash of something Jennifer couldn't quite place. Fear? Anger? Pain? The silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable. "What was his name?" Evelyn finally asked, her voice carefully controlled. Jennifer's throat felt dry. "I don't know his full name, but his son's name is Obinna." The moment the name left her lips, Evelyn's entire body tensed. Her fingers curled around her cup, knuckles turning white. The reaction was small, but Jennifer saw it. Her pulse quickened. "Mom?" she pressed, watching her mother's face closely. "Do you know him?" Evelyn let out a slow breath, as if trying to steady herself.
Jennifer, I don't think this is something you should dig into. Her tone was firm, dismissive, but that only made Jennifer more desperate. Why not? She demanded. Who is he? Evelyn shook her head. Let it go.
Jennifer's frustration boiled over.
I can't let it go, Mom, she snapped, drawing the attention of a few customers around them. She lowered her voice. If you know who he is, tell me. Please. Evelyn looked away, staring out the window as if searching for a way to escape. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. A long time ago, there was a man who made my life a living hell. He was charming, persuasive. He made me believe he loved me. She paused, swallowing hard. But he was a liar, a criminal. He chose power and money over everything, even me. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest. And then he left you, she murmured, already knowing the answer. Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. No, she said softly. He didn't just leave, Jennifer. I ran. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be alive today. Jennifer's blood ran cold. The air around her felt heavier, pressing down on her chest. Are you saying? She could barely get the words out. Evelyn finally turned to her, and for the first time, Jennifer saw true fear in her mother's eyes. Obinna's father, she said, her voice trembling, is your father. Jennifer couldn't move. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, a slow, suffocating poison that seeped into every corner of her thoughts. Obinna's father is your father. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. Her stomach twisted violently, and she gripped the edge of the table as if holding on to reality itself. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That can't be true. Evelyn sighed, rubbing her temples. I never wanted you to know, Jennifer. I never wanted his shadow to touch your life. Her mother's voice was tired, worn down by a past she had spent years running from. I left him before you were born. I changed my name. I disappeared because I knew what he was. I thought I could protect you from it. Jennifer's hands trembled. And yet here I am, sitting across from you, dating his son. The words felt like shattered glass in her mouth. Evelyn reached across the table, placing a hand over Jennifer's. It was warm, steady, so different from the chaos raging inside her. I should have told you earlier, Evelyn admitted. But what would I have said? That your father was a criminal? A man who built his life on blood money? That he abandoned me not because he didn't love me, but because his greed consumed him? How could I have explained that to a child? Jennifer felt a sharp pang in her chest. All her life, she had grown up despising the idea of men, convinced they were nothing but sources of pain. And now, the very man she had unknowingly let into her life was connected to the one person she hated the most. Does he know? Jennifer finally asked, her voice hollow. Who? Obinna's father. Does he know I exist? Her mother hesitated, and in that moment, Jennifer already knew the answer. Evelyn exhaled sharply, looking away. I don't know. When I left, I made sure he wouldn't find me. I wanted to disappear completely. But men like him, they never truly let go of what's theirs. A shiver ran down Jennifer's spine. The thought of a man she had never met, yet who had shaped so much of her life, sent a wave of unease through her. She thought back to Obinna, to the warmth in his eyes, the way he had made her feel something she had long sworn off. How could she look at him the same way again, knowing that his blood was the same as hers? What do I do? She whispered, more to herself than to her mother. Evelyn's face softened. You walk away, Jennifer, she said, her voice firm. You walk away before it's too late. But as Jennifer sat there, staring at the truth that had just shattered her world, she knew deep down it was already too late. Jennifer sat alone in her apartment,
staring at the wall as if the answers she desperately needed would appear from the cracks in the paint. Her mind felt like a tangled web of confusion, anger, and disbelief. The air around her was heavy, pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Obinna, his father, her father. The revelation gnawed at her, refusing to let go. She wanted to deny it, pretend that her mother had been mistaken, that this was some cruel coincidence. But deep down, she knew Evelyn wouldn't lie about something this serious. The moment her mother had uttered those words, Jennifer's entire world had shifted, and now nothing felt real anymore. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to silence the thoughts screaming in her head. Walk away, her mother had told her, before it's too late. But how was she supposed to do that when she had already let Obinna into her heart? Her phone buzzed beside her, and she flinched at the sound. For a long moment she simply stared at the screen, afraid to look. When she finally did, her chest tightened. Obinna. Hey, beautiful, I miss you. Can I see you tonight? Jennifer's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't bring herself to reply. Every time she thought of his smile, of the way he looked at her, all she could see now was the face of the man in the photograph, the man who had made her mother run for her life, a man who had abandoned them both. And yet Obinna was nothing like that. He was kind, patient, persistent in a way that had made her believe just for a moment that love wasn't as terrifying as she had always thought. But what would he say if he found out? Would he even believe her? Or worse, would he already know? The thought sent a chill down her spine. A sharp knock at the door made her heart leap into her throat. Jennifer hesitated before slowly rising to her feet. When she opened it, Obinna stood there, his usual confident smile faltering as he took in her tense expression. Jennifer? Are you okay? His concern was genuine, and it made her stomach churn. She wanted to tell him, to ask him if he knew, to demand the truth. But the words caught in her throat. She swallowed hard. I wasn't expecting you. He chuckled softly. You didn't respond to my text. I got worried. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time since she had met him, Jennifer felt truly afraid of what lay ahead. She stepped aside, letting him in, but her hands were cold, her body rigid. Obinna reached for her, brushing a hand against her cheek. Talk to me, he whispered. Jennifer met his gaze, her heart hammering. She opened her mouth, but instead of the truth, a single lie slipped out. I'm fine. But as Obinna pulled her into his arms, Jennifer knew the weight of the secret would crush her before she ever found the courage to tell him the truth. Jennifer lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Obinna slept beside her. His slow, steady breathing filled the silence, a contrast to the storm raging inside her. She turned her head slightly, watching his face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. He looked peaceful, unaware of the turmoil twisting in her gut. She had spent the entire evening pretending to be okay, forcing smiles, nodding at his words, while her mind replayed her mother's warning. Walk away before it's too late. But how could she walk away now? How could she look at Obinna and pretend he hadn't already become a part of her? Her fingers tightened around the sheets. Does he know? The question had haunted her since the moment she learned the truth. Did Obinna's father know about her? Had he told his son? Was this all some sick twist of fate, or had Obinna unknowingly fallen for the daughter of the man his father abandoned? The thought made her stomach churn. A part of her wanted to wake him up, to shake him and demand the truth. But the other part, the terrified part, wasn't ready to hear his answer. What if he already knew and had chosen to say nothing? Or worse, what if he didn't know and she would be the one to tear his world apart? Jennifer turned away, staring into the darkness. She couldn't keep this secret forever. It was growing inside her, suffocating her more with each passing day. And yet the fear of losing him kept her frozen in place. How could she tell him that the father he loved, the man he looked up to, was the same man who had ruined her mother's life, that he was the same man she had spent years despising.
Her heart ached with the weight of it all. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow I will tell him everything. But deep down, she knew tomorrow would come, and she would still be too afraid to speak the truth. Jennifer sat across from Obinna at a small cafe, stirring her untouched coffee. She had barely slept the night before, and it showed in the dark circles beneath her eyes. Obinna, oblivious to the storm inside her, reached for her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "You've been quiet lately," he said, studying her. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" Her heart pounded. This was it. This was the moment she had told herself would come. She needed to tell him about her mother, about his father, about everything that had turned her world upside down. But as she looked into his eyes, the words caught in her throat. His gaze was full of concern, of the love she had spent years pushing away, only to finally allow herself to feel. She swallowed hard. "I've just been thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a lie. She had been thinking, too much. But it wasn't the truth either, and she hated herself for it. Obinna squeezed her hand gently. "You know you can talk to me, right?" he said softly. "Whatever it is, I'm here." Jennifer forced a smile, nodding, but inside, guilt clawed at her. She was lying to him, even if only by omission. But how could she rip his world apart when he had done nothing but care for her? How could she tell him that the father he loved, the man who raised him, was the same man who had abandoned her mother and left him to suffer? She lowered her gaze, gripping the coffee cup to steady her shaking hands. "Not today," she thought. "I can't do it today." And so she sat there, pretending everything was fine, even as the truth threatened to break her from the inside out. Jennifer walked through the bustling city streets, her mind drowning in thoughts she couldn't silence. The secret she carried felt heavier with each passing day, suffocating her like a weight pressing against her chest. She had tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it didn't change everything. But it did. Every time she looked at Obinna, she saw the face in the photograph. Every time he spoke about his father, she felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. It was consuming her, poisoning every moment they spent together. She couldn't keep living like this. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. That evening, she called her mother. Evelyn's voice was cautious when she answered. "Jennifer, what is it?" "I need to see him," Jennifer said, gripping the phone tightly. "Obinna's father. I need to hear it from him." There was silence on the other end. Then her mother's sharp intake of breath. "Jennifer, don't do this. I told you, walk away." "I can't." Her voice was firm, despite the turmoil inside her. "I need answers, Mom. I need to know if he even remembers us. If he even cared." Evelyn sighed. "And what if he doesn't? What if he looks you in the eye and feels nothing?" Jennifer closed her eyes. That was what she feared the most. But she had to know. She had spent her whole life resenting a man she had never met, and now fate had thrown her straight into his world. There was no running from it. That weekend, she found herself outside Obinna's house, her heart hammering against her ribs. Obinna had invited her over for dinner, excited for her to finally meet his father. He had no idea what she was about to do. As she stepped through the door, her hands trembled. And then he appeared. A tall man with streaks of gray in his hair, his presence commanding yet strangely familiar. The moment his eyes met hers, something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, a shadow of the past that wouldn't stay buried. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as Jennifer stood frozen in place. Obinna's father, her father, stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something in his eyes, something flickering beneath the surface, but he said nothing. He simply looked at her, as if searching for a memory long buried. Jennifer's heart pounded, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had imagined this moment 100 times, rehearsed all the things she wanted to say, the accusations, the questions, the pain she had carried for years. But now, faced with the man who had shaped her life in his absence, the words refused to come. Obinna, oblivious to the tension, smiled proudly. "Dad, this is Jennifer, the woman I've been telling you about." His voice was filled with warmth, with the kind of excitement that made Jennifer's stomach twist with guilt. He had no idea. He didn't know that the man he respected, the father he loved, was the reason Jennifer had grown up fatherless. She glanced at her mother, who sat stiffly on the couch, her face a mask of barely concealed fury. Evelyn hadn't wanted to come, but Jennifer had insisted. Now, seeing her mother's clenched fists and unblinking stare, she wondered if this had been a mistake. Obinna's father finally spoke, his voice calm but laced with something Jennifer couldn't name. "Jennifer," he said slowly, as if tasting the name on his tongue. "It's nice to finally meet you." There was no recognition in his words, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, of unease. Jennifer clenched her fists at her sides. Did he remember? Or was she just another face to him, another woman in his son's life? The dinner went on, tense and filled with unspoken words. Obinna chatted, oblivious, while Jennifer barely touched her food. Her mother remained silent, her every movement controlled, calculated, and through it all, Obinna's father kept glancing at Jennifer, as if trying to place her. Finally, as the evening drew to a close, he pulled her aside. His voice was quiet, but firm. "Who are you?" he asked. The question sent a chill down her spine. She met his gaze, her own voice shaking as she whispered, "You don't remember me, do you?" And in that moment, she saw it, the realization, the fear, the guilt flashing across his face. He knew. He had always known. And yet, he had chosen to forget. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Jennifer felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the man who had unknowingly shaped her entire life. His face, once unfamiliar, now carried the weight of everything she had lost. Obinna's father, her father, opened his mouth as if to speak, but hesitated. The flicker of recognition in his eyes deepened into something heavier. Guilt. "I would," he stopped, swallowing hard. His fingers trembled as he ran a hand over his face, exhaling shakily. "You're her daughter," he finally said. The words felt like a confession, like a wound torn open. Jennifer clenched her fists, every emotion she had buried for years rising to the surface. "You knew," she accused, her voice raw. "You knew I was the moment you saw me, didn't you?" His silence was answer enough. Evelyn, who had been watching from a distance, stepped forward, her expression as cold as steel. "Don't act surprised," she spat. "You left us. You never looked back. And now, here we are, in your perfect little life, as if none of it ever happened." Obinna's father turned to her, regret etched into every line of his face. "I thought you were dead," he admitted. "I searched for you, for a while. But when I couldn't find you, he faltered, looking away. "I told myself it was too late, that maybe it was better that way." Jennifer let out a bitter laugh. Better for who? Her voice cracked, filled with years of unspoken pain. "For you? So you could move on without the shame of what you did? Without facing what you left behind?" She shook her head, stepping back. "You ruined her life. You ruined my life. And you just erased us." Obinna, who had been listening from the doorway, finally stepped in. His face was a mask of confusion and hurt. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tight. Jennifer, What is he talking about? Jennifer turned to him, her throat dry. She had tried to avoid this moment to protect him from the truth, but there was no hiding it anymore. With trembling lips, she whispered, "He's my father, Obinna. The man you admire, the man you love, is the same man who abandoned me before I was even born."
Obinna's face paled, his breath hitching. He looked between Jennifer and his father, his entire world crumbling in an instant. The betrayal in his eyes mirrored the pain in Jennifer's heart. In that moment, everything shattered. The room felt like it was collapsing in on itself. The weight of Jennifer's words had turned everything cold, stealing the warmth that once existed between them. Obinna's eyes darted between her and his father, searching for some kind of denial, some explanation that would make it all untrue. But there was none. The silence that followed was louder than any words could ever be.
"You're lying," Obinna finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. But there was no conviction in it, only desperation. He turned to his father, his jaw tightening. "Tell me she's lying."
Obinna's father, their father, lowered his head. His silence was confirmation enough. Obinna stumbled back as if he had been struck. "So it's true." His voice cracked, his fists clenching at his sides. "You abandoned her? You left them to suffer while you built a new life? While you raised me?" His breaths were ragged, his body trembling with disbelief.
"All these years, and you never told me?"
Jennifer swallowed hard, watching the man who had once been her greatest source of resentment now falling apart before her eyes. She had hated him for so long, but seeing the shame in his eyes, she realized something. Nothing she could say would punish him more than the truth already had. "Obinna," she started, reaching for him, but he stepped away, his face twisted with hurt. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice hollow. Jennifer's throat tightened.
"Not long. I found out when I saw the picture in your house."
Obinna let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "And you didn't tell me?" His voice rose, filled with anger and pain. "You let me fall in love with you while knowing we were—" He choked on the words, unable to say them aloud.
Tears stung Jennifer's eyes. "I didn't know how, Obinna. I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," he whispered, his shoulders slumping. "You both did." He looked at his father, disgust and sorrow clouding his gaze. "I can't even look at you right now." He turned to Jennifer, his expression softer but no less broken. "And you were the first woman I ever truly loved. And now, I don't even know who we are."
Jennifer felt her heart shatter. There was nothing she could say to fix this.
Obinna exhaled shakily, stepping away from them both. "I need time," he murmured. "I need to think." Without another word, he walked out, leaving Jennifer and her father alone in the wreckage of what could never be repaired. Jennifer wiped at her tears, turning to the man who had caused it all. "I don't hate you anymore," she said, her voice raw. "But I can never love you either." Her father nodded slowly, accepting the truth. And with that, Jennifer walked away, leaving the past where it belonged, behind her. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.